But I'd like to now invite Caroline Choi to turn on your camera. Great. Caroline Choi is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Southern California Edison and its parent company, Edison International. She oversees corporate communications, corporate philanthropy, government relations, and public affairs at the national, state, and local levels. She also serves on a number of nonprofit boards, some focused on both clean energy and electric transportation. She's a leader in corporate, nonprofit, and government spaces. Please welcome Caroline. Thank you so much, Caroline, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. So glad to be here. And yeah, thanks to Cause for having this event, and happy Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month.
Thanks. Yeah, no, we were excited that both this Women Empowerment as well as we could make it part of this Cause Leadership Institute, which is virtual again this year. But they've been talking a lot about different ways to be civically engaged. And so it was really perfect to have you here because you've had experiences in so many different sectors and have a very different career path that I think really matches what is possible in terms of working in government affairs. So I thought we'd start with what was that moment you realized that you wanted to work in government affairs? And could you also then share about how your role collaborates with policymakers?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm not going to say that it was a moment. When I was named the head of corporate affairs in 2019 at Edison International, it was like coming full circle because my first job, my first real job out of college was in government, where I was working on the Hill for the person who represented my hometown in North Carolina. And so I felt like it was one of the best jobs, still think it's one of the best jobs I ever had. And for those of you who have been staffers, you know, it's fast paced, a lot of information coming my way, helping constituents in the district, getting exposure to issues that I never even heard of before I became a staffer. It was also the first job where, you know, I was calling men and women that were older than me by the first names instead of ma'am or sir or Mr., Mrs., Miss, whatever. So that took some getting used to. And it's really where I understood how important using our voice can be in making an impact. And so what's key, I think, in government affairs is making the connections between people and opportunities to solve issues, to advocate for change, policies that make people's lives better. And in my current role at Edison, I get to lead a team that's full of government affairs, public affairs, communications, and philanthropy professionals. And so at Edison, you know, probably our biggest focus, and we talk a lot about it, is helping to create that just, equitable, clean energy economy for 2030 and 2045. And it absolutely supports the business that I'm in, but it also helps to support the state in its goals for climate change and for clean air and for the type of economy that it wants to move towards as we think about the future and the planet. And so the folks that I work with at Edison, when we talk about collaborating with policymakers, it's really how our business interests align with the government priorities. And in this case, I think there's great alignment in terms of the priorities that we have, in terms of helping, like I said, to create that just, equitable, clean energy economy and where the state is headed, because we recognize that clean energy, which we procure a lot of and deliver to our customers, is what the state wants. And electrification, whether that is transportation or buildings, also aligns with where the state is headed in terms of that carbon neutral economy in 2045, because electrification, that whole pathway of clean energy and electrification, is the least cost way of achieving what the state wants to achieve. So it's great that our business strategy aligns with the state strategy, and that's just a benefit. There's all those times when sometimes we don't have alignment and we have to work through where, even though we have differences, what are the places where we can align and work through and at least come to some common understanding in certain areas, even though we may not agree on all aspects of an issue. And so just as Congresswoman Chang talked about having compromise in legislation, we do the same, not just with policymakers, but with the stakeholders. And many of you work for companies and You all know how it is to all have your voices going into whether that's Sacramento or Washington, D.C., or at the local level. And rarely is there unanimity in a position, but it is working with like-minded parties, bringing other voices that help to put together a coalition, whether it's a loose coalition or a formal coalition that helps make sure that we amplify the voices, and particularly our voices of the communities that are often underrepresented in Southern California, and bring that forward. You know, one of the things, we had a meeting not too long ago with Senator Padilla, and I was telling him how glad I was that he that yes, he represents the state, but that he comes from Southern California. And because so many of our statewide leaders actually come from Northern California, as you know. And he mentioned, I had no idea, but he said, you know, when I started in politics, when I was in the city of LA, and if you were to draw a line across the state that divided the population of the state from north to south, where, do you know where that line was? And we were all guessing where the line was. And he said that the line was in the San Fernando Valley. And he said, do you know where the line is now? And no, he didn't know. And he said, the line is now through downtown LA. So it just shows you how much of the population of the state of California is down here in Southern California, and the importance of using our voices to really make sure that the policymakers that are in Sacramento, and particularly the agency heads and the folks that are in the commissions and things like that that are being appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate, that they understand the challenges that we have in Southern California, how different they are from Northern California, the population, the diversity, the roads, all these different things that make Southern California unique, that are leveraging those voices to policymakers, and making sure that that is being heard too, because oftentimes I think we see policy that doesn't reflect necessarily the challenges and the opportunities that we have in Southern California. So it's one of my favorite things. I had no idea that so much of the population, just really, you can see that it's not a whole lot of the population, not as much of the state after you draw a line east to west in downtown LA, but that just shows you how many people are down here. And if we can put our collective voices forward, the opportunities that we have.
No, yeah, and it's so great to hear you just talk about like how your role in this company is also a role that is inclusive of thinking about communities and voice and what it looks like to really have an impact there too. So it's some of what I was hearing in the way you were talking about it. And I think just wanted to get a little bit more of a sense of what you feel like the key elements were for you to get to this place. Like what were some of the things you learned from others, and what were some things that you know are unique to you and were part of the way that you were able to create this path?
Yeah, so I did not start with an ambition to be in government affairs. Let me just be clear. I was a government major in college, but that was sort of the extent of it. I don't think I was actually really, again, still planning for a government job or government affairs. I think I was thinking, oh, I'll go to law school and become a lawyer. But I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. It was a very small town. We were the only Asian family, so very different than Southern California, where we have a huge Asian population, a lot of diversity across many races and ethnicities. But I would say my parents really pushed me and my siblings to think beyond just this little town where we live, that it wasn't representative of the bigger world, for certain. And one key element then for me in creating my path was my parents, and exposing me to the broader world and to push for results. I'm sure I'm not the only one whose parents were asking about good grades in school, but not just grades. It's also being engaged in the community, whether it was Girl Scouts when I was younger or volunteering in the community when I was older. And so just having a sense of responsibility beyond just thinking about myself. When I graduated from college with my government degree, the economy was in a really downturn. And so I graduated without a job, as did many of my colleagues or classmates. And so I was actually working at the college for a professor when I landed my job in Washington, D.C. as a Hill staffer. And that was really due to my godfather, who was a state legislator and who knew the congressman who had just been elected. And so was building up his staff, and so I started as an intern, right? And $12,500 a year. Oh my God, I was so poor. And became from an intern to legislative correspondent to legislative assistant to legislative director. Became an appropriations staffer. He got named to the appropriations committee, and one of the things that the appropriations committee members did for themselves is to have two staffers that they got funded by the committee versus their their staff budget. And so they actually ended up having more staff than a typical member may have. And I would say a key element there for me and just having the development on the Hill was being a workhorse. I mean, I think it's my nature. I am a workhorse, but it's also really essential when you are a staffer. I know many of you who have been staffers understand that. There's always a ton of work to do. There's never enough people to do it. It's truly many times the 24/7 business because bills have this certain period of time when the session's in, and so you can be working very late at night and early mornings. And so whether that was crafting a letter or printing form responses or stuffing envelopes, taking phone calls, driving the congressman, I mean, I would do any of that. So just, I think, showing your willingness to work and doing really high quality work, whatever it is another great way to move ahead. And that certainly helped me in my career. When I shifted to the private sector, because I left the Hill and moved to the private sector and was a lobbyist, it was definitely different. I as a Hill staffer, you always get your calls answered, right? People always call you back because, of course, they're trying to influence you to get your boss to vote a certain way. And so being on the other side of that and asking staffers to call me back and getting them information and trying to make sure they looked at it when there's like all this information they're getting on all these other matters, it was definitely an exciting challenge. And it paid to be humble, really, and to put in your dues and build those relationships, because it's building those relationships that allows progress to be made. We talk about at times change moves at the speed of trust. And so you have to build a relationship of trust, whether it's the staffers, with the legislator or the member, making sure that you're talking to the schedulers very respectfully, because they're the ones at the end of the day who are putting you on the calendar, to build those relationships across the staff levels, and including the member, of course, that help build a relationship can move your policies forward. So that was something that I learned early on, and certainly even as a staffer, the people that you like are the ones that treat you respectfully and don't think of you as a 20-something-year-old kid who doesn't know what they're talking about. And I'm not saying that I knew what I was talking about, because I was a 20-something kid who probably didn't know a lot about what I was talking about, but I didn't need someone to have an attitude about it to me, so that was a big thing for me. And then I was in regulatory affairs for a long time. I actually shifted from government affairs to regulatory affairs once I moved to my first electric utility. And I worked in environmental permitting and environmental regulation and proceedings at the Public Utilities Commission, et cetera. And something that I really enjoyed doing. Sometimes politics in the government sphere can be tough and it can be exhausting. In regulatory affairs, there is less politics. It's still there, of course, but I think oftentimes in the regulatory space, you put the best case forward. You have your data, your science, your facts, and it helps more with prevailing at the end of the day in a proceeding. And as many of you know, when it comes down to politics or policy, politics often wins. And we kind of heard the Congresswoman just now, like on gun control, right? Just common sense measures that many people support, and we still can't get those. And that's politics of a situation, not the policies that the public supports, and you've got a lot of members that support it too. So it was a nice sort of break, I think, from the government affairs space for a little bit. And there's obviously a lot of linkage, because many of the regulators are appointed by your governor or and then approved by the Senate. So that was something that I dealt with when I was in North Carolina, and something that even when I moved here to California, to Southern California, Edison 10 years ago in the regulatory space, worked a lot with the government affairs team because we wanted to make sure we had good people nominated to these different bodies that were important to the company. And so let's name some people, and let's make sure that some of these people are from Southern California, please, because they know the difference between what's happening in Southern California and Northern California. And so it was, but coming back into government affairs or public affairs, or I guess we call it corporate affairs, because it's not just the government affairs, but it's communications and the philanthropy as well. Was a nice sort of welcoming back to, again, like I said, full circle from where I started many years ago. So.
Yeah, I think it's just so interesting to me to also hear all the different ways, not just working hard, but I'm hearing also about relationship building, about really showing up, getting something done and done well, but that over time, like how that plays out in this space, and really what is possible in terms of change is also related to all of it. And so it's really interesting to hear how it played out in your career. And I'd love to hear too, like, there's a lot of folks here who are interested in not just running for office, but are very interested in policy. And so what do you see as the future of government affairs, and what advice would you have to someone who's interested in joining this field?
Well, I think that the government affairs sphere is growing, honestly, because there's so many aspects now of business that really need government affairs, and some companies who may not have ever had a government affairs function are looking to add that to their to their teams now. And I think diversity in government affairs is super important. You look around, especially in California, but nationally too, and not just the AAPI community that's growing, but you see these efforts of many businesses to push diversity within their business strategies. I mean, it's certainly something that at Edison we're doing. And so I do think that having a government affairs team that has not just gender diversity, which is really important, but also ethnic and racial diversity, I see that continuing to expand in government affairs. And so I think the Cause Leadership Program and this, the Leadership Institute, is a really important way to both build the skills, but also build a network of people who are going into government affairs. And one of the things that I'm sure you've seen, Nancy, and you're an example of it, because a little over a year ago, you weren't at Cause. So people do move around in the government affairs space, and building those networks along the way of where you have been and then where you go next. It like I said, it just creates a web of relationships that you have, and that helps build not just a career, but helps build a career of others, right? Because I think one of the things that I enjoy doing is connecting people that I know, and where I think that they can help one another, not just from a professional development perspective, but actual, professional work that that a business deal could get done between two people's companies by making that connection. And so I think spending time on building those relationships or maintaining the relationships that you have, because I don't think it's necessarily you have to have a huge network, but having a few key ones, I think does make a difference. And checking in on people, because people don't like to be called for a request when you haven't kept in touch with how they're doing, So I think it's really important just to check on people and how they're doing, and maintaining that relationship, even as a touch point, just once a year, just checking in, see how their families are, see, oh, the kids are in college now, or things like that. I mean, time does fly, honestly. And it amazes me actually when I check in on some of my friends, much less colleagues in the government affairs field, how much change has occurred in just a short period of time. And certainly over the last 2 years plus here with COVID-19, people have had some immense changes in their lives as a result of not just the pandemic, but what it's done to businesses and what it's done to families. And so having that check-in, I think, is super important. So yeah, I think government affairs is just a growing field. And some of these companies that are just startups now, they even recognize that the role of government in their success, in their business success, is such that it's important to have a government affairs function to help them navigate with government on the importance of whatever tax policy or health policy or whatever it may be in order for them to be successful. So I just see it being a real growth sector, continue to be a growth sector going forward.
No, it is. It's so interesting to see all the different layers of it, but also I think to your point around touching, catching up, touching base with each other too. Like I've been surprised at who I continue to run into since I've been here at Cause, and just remembering our community actually is very connected and small. And sometimes those catch-ups really end up resulting in pretty amazing collaborations. And so
Yeah.
I really have appreciated that too. I see a question in the chat that I'm going to ask, but that's a warning to the fellows that if you have a question, definitely think it through, flag it, and we'll ask it next. So the question is, what are you personally looking forward to most about the future of API leadership at SCE in California and in the country?
Wow. Well, I'll start with at SCE. When I got to Southern California Edison 10 years ago, I was the first female officer at the company, which is pretty amazing because at the time we were 125 years old. And so it took 125 years for us to have an Asian officer. Not that we didn't have Asian executives before that, but it was sort of like, wow. And the guy who was the first Asian officer at the company, he had just gotten there only a few years before me. So let's just say at 120. So let's just say it took 120 years to get the first Asian officer ever at the company. But since that time, we've made up for lost time. I'm very glad to say. And so it's been really nice to see the growth of representation of APIs at Southern California Edison at the executive and senior executive ranks. And so I'm a senior vice president at both the holding company and the utility. And Eric Takiesu, who many of you know, became a senior vice president earlier this month. I can't remember when, but just a couple of weeks ago, we promoted him to senior vice president. We have, I think, 5 officers now that are Asian or APIs, and a number of directors. So it's really been an incredible rise, I think, of APIs at Edison. And I see that continuing. So I'm very pleased to see it. We've worked hard as an enterprise to focus on both gender parity. We're trying to get gender parity across the company. Actually, at the executive managing committee, we do have gender parity at 50-50. And at SCE, we actually have more women. Well, now Eric's there. We might be at gender parity. We're outnumbering the men, but now that Eric's there, I think we might be 50-50. And working on the racial and ethnic diversity as well. So it's been really wonderful to see. AAPIs, as you all know, are fastest growing population in California. So absolutely see more AAPIs being represented in government, starting at the local level, which we are seeing a lot of growth of APIs at the local level. And that's the feeder pool for state and for federal representation. And so I do think that, at least in California, having institutes like this that Edison's so proud to support is a step, because it helps provide that awareness of like, oh, I could represent my community. And starting, I don't know, at the school board. Well, I don't know, school boards have gotten so political. Maybe start in the planning commission. I don't know, they're all political now. But in any case, starting at a local level, at something that's even below the city council level, just to get your feet wet, to see if you like it, because it is a lot of work. There's a lot of, I decided when I was a staffer, I could never be an elected official because I really dislike the town hall meetings, not from the questions, but like you'd have a town hall on healthcare, because healthcare was really big when I was on the Hill. And so you'd have 10 town halls across the district on healthcare. And by the third one, I was so bored because it was like the same questions that have been asked in the first two. And I was like, oh my gosh, and you have to pretend that it's such a great, and it is a great question. It's just the third time I've heard it. And by the 10th time I've heard it, it's really, not as interesting. So I was just like, I cannot fake that nearly as well as you need to fake it to be an elected official. Even though they're very good questions, it's very hard for me after the 10th time being like, that's a great question, and being as enthusiastic about it as the first time that I heard it. So I just realized that was definitely not for me. I couldn't do the campaigning part of political office, and probably the fundraising part either, to be fair. But in any case, I would say I do see just great opportunities for the Asian Pacific Islander population, not just because the growth of the population, but I think the growing awareness of APIs in civic engagement, and Cause led the way in that. I mean, folks like Charlie really have dedicated so much of their time and their resources to bringing that awareness to the API community, because traditionally, I would say we just put our heads down and work and not even think so much about how do we engage in the political process. And organizations like Cause are so important to really bring that awareness to generations like you all in order to get you to move into that direction, whether it's on the private sector side like myself or in the public side. So I'm very optimistic.
I'm glad to hear it, because I think that that's important, and I think I'm glad you mentioned Charlie as well. I think he wasn't able to make it today, but I know he's excited to see this recording, so he'll be excited to hear himself name. But I also feel like he's just been such a great leader, as well as our other leaders here today too. So
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna invite Howie to ask his question, and then we'll wrap up your segment. But yeah, Howie, go ahead, turn on your camera.
Hello, thank you for speaking. First off, my question is this: I'm generally environmentally conscientious. I want to shift towards renewables, more electricity, and whatnot. The two big ones in my mind is getting EV cars or putting up solar panels. Except those are contingent on me having a house. And so like me and many of my peers struggle with buying a house in SoCal because it's expensive. So is there any initiatives, policy, anything else that I can support that's more than just like being mindful of my lights?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really great question. So for those who rent, it is definitely more difficult for programs like ours and other utilities because they are geared to, as you noted, homeowners. Now we do have a program for multi-unit dwellings, called apartment buildings, multi-unit dwellings, MUDs, that is intended to put solar on multi-unit dwellings so that the building occupants would be the beneficiaries of that. So your building management company could participate in that program, and it's actually targeted it's targeted towards our underserved communities, which we have a lot of in Southern California, as you know, disadvantaged communities per the Cal Enviro screen. So that's a potential one. The state has maybe other programs that would be helpful to renters for solar, but that is definitely a difficult one because you don't own your roof. Cars, it's a little bit easier because you can get a lease or you can buy even though you don't own your home. The charging is where may be difficult. And so one of the things we're working on, we have a program called Charge Ready that is putting chargers in places that are publicly accessible. And so we're trying to get about 50,000 chargers across our service area to help with vehicle adoption, and particularly for places that that are not none of the program isn't targeted to homeowners. It's targeted to places that will have public access, and it's targeted to multi-unit dwellings, because when we did the pilot, one of the things they found out was that in multi-unit dwellings, you had the building owner and you had the building management, and they were not the same, right? So the building owner hires the building management company. Neither one wanted to necessarily take responsibility for chargers. The building owner was like, well, I got the building management company. The building management company is like, well, I only have the contract for X number of years, so I'm not sure. And so one of the things that we have in our charge rate program is an option for the utility to own and operate the charger. So now the building owner, the building management company can agree that, okay, yes, we want chargers in our building. Edison, you come in, you own and operate. We don't have to deal with if it breaks down. You are the one who's going to get the charger fixed and that kind of thing. So that is something that we are also working on, not just publicly accessible charging, but charging in multi-unit dwellings so that people who can have access to EV charging there too.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for spending time with us today. I think I love listening to you talk about what you're passionate about. And also I've heard so many things about how fun it is to be on the Edison team. And so it's really great to hear it. But yeah, thank you for being here, for being part of our Creating Our Paths and Women in Power. So
thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.